Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I have with me today Dr. Lobsang Sangay. He's the President of Central Tibetan Administration. He's going to discuss with us several issues concerning India-China border tensions and also what is Tibet thinking at this point of time in terms of its own identity. Welcome to ThePrint, Dr. Sangay. So to quickly start off, let me first understand from you, how are you viewing the recent tensions between India and China? We know things are getting de-escalated now, but there have been these fears that, this time it has been really a serious border standoff and not really a rhetoric that we see. What are your views on that?
No, we've been saying for the last 60 years, after the occupation of Tibet, what happened to Tibet could happen to all the neighboring countries, including India. And now it's happening, and since Doklam, it has been happening, and all the border incursions have been increasing every year. So this is the pattern and the expansionist design of the Chinese government that we see now, so at the border of India, as well as in, other parts of the world as well. So when Tibet was free, border between India and Tibet was without military presence, even marginal, very few policemen were needed, Now you have all these, thousands and thousands of Indian troops patrolling the border, and Indian government is spending about $60 billion a year. So huge cost to the defense. And in some ways, it could have been diverted and spent on other educational, health, and migrant laborers, so on and so forth, So we have been saying this for the last 60 years. So what happened to Tibet could happen to you. It's happening now.
Mm-hmm. So we see this time, this is an unprecedented time that the world is seeing in terms of the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. Even amid this pandemic, while China is sort of recovering and it has come out of the crisis, so to say, it continues with its aggressive stance, be it the Hong Kong issue, South China Sea, and also this month-long standoff almost with India. How do you see this? What do you think they're doing at this point of time?
In China, there is internal pressure. And is dealing with business relationship with America and growing skepticism on security matters from Europe to Australia to Japan to New Zealand. And there is, murmurs going on within China as to how China is handling all these things. And with the 130 some countries coming together to, investigate the origin of, coronavirus, which happened in Wuhan, China. So China is looking at, diversion as well. And then, through this security and military adventurism, you can divert a couple of countries, from China-focused, blaming China on coronavirus and trust deficit that it has raised against China, China wants to focus on something else.
Mm-hmm. Coming to the question again, I'm staying with the India-China border tension. There have been questions. Some of the former diplomats have questioned the fact that why has His Holiness Dalai Lama has remained silent on the matter? Why is he not talking about it, considering that he has seen what the Chinese can do? So why is he not taking a position here? What would you like to say on that?
Number one, in 2011, His Holiness has devolved all his political authorities and has separated church and the state, right? So he is our most revered spiritual leader, and my office has been delegated the political and administrative matters. That's number one. So there's clear-cut separation. Number two, His Holiness has been speaking, for India and for Tibet and against Chinese government for the last 60 years. He has been, global face and, promoter of Indian Nalanda tradition and so on and so forth. For the last 60 years, he has called himself son of India, I don't think he has to make comments on every matter that comes up, right? Number three, and it's not true, you're mentioning, I read your article also in print, what S. Tobden has said. His Holiness has visited Ladakh 27 times, and he has conferred 3 or 4 Kala Chakra teachings. This is the highest form of teaching. He has attended 3 or 4 birthdays, his own birthdays. Other than Dharamsala, where I am now, which is the center of Tibetan administration, he has visited Ladakh the most, and Ladakh people all know that. That's why their love and faith in him towards him is so strong. They all rose up, passed resolution, shut down Leh, the capital city of Ladakh Union Territory, against S. Tobden. So he's a marginal figure. And he knows the fact that the Tibetan national flag has been there for the last 30 years. It's still there even today. An Indian citizen and Ladakhi resident has hoisted the flag and is still standing there. We also say Ladakh belongs to India and Ladakhi residents are there. And I have so many friends. In fact, I have standing invitation to go to Ladakh by leaders of Ladakh.
So let's just take it a little forward in terms of, the one China policy that India views. Now, recently, the Taiwan representative to India has given an interview again to ThePrint, where he stated that, China has constantly undermined the one India policy. So he's basically hinting at the fact that why should India follow one China policy? How do you view that from the perspective of Tibet?
If you look at the recent security law passed in Beijing vis-a-vis Hong Kong, we've been saying this again for the last 60, 70 years. Tibet was offered the first one country, two system policy based on 17-point agreement, which was signed on May 23rd, 1951. But from 51 to 59, instead of implementing those provisions, there was regression in implementation. There was denial of autonomy to Tibetan people. So one country, two system was not implemented in Tibet to begin with, which forced His Holiness the Dalai Lama and 80,000 Tibetans to flee to India, right? Because then the military invasion and persecution happened. So even the one China policy that Chinese government proposes, and there are many reports coming from Hong Kong and other international observers. They are trying to undermine the autonomy and the freedom that people in Taiwan has. So if you look at Hong Kong, one country, two system is undermined. And also if you look at Taiwan, the attempt has been made, but thankfully there is a democratic setup and the people of Taiwan have spoken, and democratic, they have elected leaders, right? So that's how they function. Otherwise, yes, either one China policy or one country, two system, there is more regression than progression.
So you say that there is more regression than progression. So do you think this is probably the time that India should be also reviewing the one China policy, although it's a decision for the government to make?
Yes, normally we don't comment on internal matters of India. Our comment restricts ourselves to Tibet and to the boundary of Tibet. That's how we do it. But Chinese government has been commenting on internal matters of India and at the UN Security Council and UN forums, and they don't tend to support India's cases, right? So that's very important for Indian people to know, and accordingly, appeal to the government of India to respond accordingly.
Also coming to the fact that the tensions we are seeing, and this happened, this is going on before the pandemic sort of set in, the tensions between US and China. We've seen the ongoing tussle between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. How do you see this shaping up in the times to come, and even when the pandemic sort of subsides?
Now, there were two theories prevailing in America, right? One, engage with China, trust with China, you can do business, you can make progress, and then eventually China will become more like us, the Western democracy, liberal democracy, which respects human rights and international norms. And we've been saying, Tibetans have been saying, be careful, right? Be careful We got fooled by Chinese government in 1950s, and that's how we lost our country, and Tibetan people lost our freedom. You can't fully trust, unconditionally trust the Chinese government. And recently, through various measures, they realized from security point of view, right, and from economic point of view, even academic point of view, they realized that instead of China becoming more like liberal democracy which respects human rights and environmental matters, there's a regression, right? There's a violation of international norms. They are trying to restructure and reform United Nations in their favors. And they are trying to utilize WHO and other major international organizations, in their favor against America and other liberal democracies. Hence, they're saying now we have to be more skeptical and we will engage with China, but with skepticism and suspicion. So that's how they're approaching it, right? So these are in reaction to the missteps or the actions taken by the Chinese government.
India has also recently taken a step where it sort of put a hurdle on Chinese investments coming into India. I mean, it has not really stopped them, but it has to go through the government channel. Do you think that's a good step towards, prohibiting some of the Chinese investments coming in?
Now, it is, again, we don't comment on internal matters, right? Having said that, yeah, Indian government should do what is necessary to protect India's interests, right? So it's known all over the world that the Chinese government and business people working at the behest of the Chinese government will manipulate or maneuver international economic and other mechanisms to their advantages, right? So it's important to close loopholes and there be a fair engagement and fair business and fair competition. So that's what Indian government is doing, and that's necessary steps.
Now coming to Tibet, now recently the US Congress, we saw a bill getting produced recommending that Tibet should be recognized as a separate country. Can you elaborate on that? How do you feel about it? And how long do you think your struggle will continue?
We welcome any support by anyone, be it a US Congress member or European Parliament, Terrans, or any country, including India. So the bill was for the independence of Tibet, and we contacted his office, and they have clarified the definition of Tibet is how we understand it. That is, the three traditional provinces of Tibet, Lobsang Sangay and Amdo, is part of the definition, right? So, but having said that, that's more of a symbolic gesture on the part of a congressman. He wants to show support for Tibet. But the more substantive bill is Tibetan Policy and Support Act, which was passed by the US House. Now it's debated in the Senate, and then if Senate passes, then there's likelihood of becoming law. That bill, CTA, Tibetan Administration, will fully support and advocate.
So you think that under the present dispensation, under President Donald Trump, Tibet is getting the same kind of support it used to get from all previous American governments?
No, it's a realization of China's behavior and progression of support, right? So if you look at Bush the father to Clinton, to Bush the son, to Obama, to Trump, you can clearly see the trajectory is in the upward scale when it comes to Tibet, and also their growing suspicion about China. So the growing suspicion of China and support for Tibet are going at a similar trend, so which is very much welcome.
And lastly, how do you find India's support towards the Tibet cause under the Prime Minister Modi's rule in the second tenure, most especially? How do you see this also in the in the future? How do you see India supporting the cause going forward?
As it is, India has done the most for Tibetan cause. The very loving and generous people of India has done the most for Tibetan people. So no country has done more for Tibetan people. His Holiness Dalai Lama resides in India. Tibetan administration is in India. The largest number of Tibetans are in India. So we are very grateful. But having said that, We wish it could be a little more.
When you say a little more, what is it that you're expecting, if you can elaborate?
I would leave it to the print magazine to elaborate on it.
Well, thank you so much for talking to ThePrint, Dr. Sangay, and thank you for giving us the time. Please take care.
Thank you.